Joining me now are Charles Coleman, an MSNBC analyst and co-host of the NBC special Black Men in America, The Road to 2024, and Alexis McGill-Johnson, president of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. It is great to have you both here. Alexis, you were on the stage in Chicago. You know, we just laid out kind of the ways in which the Democratic Party has reframed a lot of the debates. But one of the things that I thought was so interesting was the way in which reproductive choice was a theme returned to again and again and again over the course of the convention, as were family values, right? There was a time in which I think the Democratic Party would have been maybe more trepidatious about tackling abortion and trying to reframe traditional family values at the same time. There was no hesitation. There was a firm belief that you can be pro-choice, believing in bodily autonomy, and also being absolutely pro-family.
Absolutely, right? I mean, look, I think the way in which the vice president has now taken on the mantle, right, and reframed the conversation to be one about trusting women, right, that really illustrated for me what the political project is that she's advancing. It is a multiracial feminist democracy. That means what happens when you actually put women at the center of your policy making and thinking. How does that expand how we think about healthcare? How does that expand how we think about care? How does it expand all of the things that we need to do to improve our economies, our communities, right? And it's such a great contrast because Donald Trump, you know, is proud of taking away, you know, reproductive rights for 50% of the population. And here she is centering us, and it feels so good.
And all of it worked, I felt like, quite seamlessly. You know, Charles, Alexis points out that women were centered in a lot of the arguments, I guess, that the Democrats are making to the country about why they should support a Democratic ticket. Men were part of that conversation, too, in a way that we haven't seen. I wonder what you made of the way in which masculinity was a redefinition of a different kind of masculinity was part of the proceedings, too, right? You had a football coach out there who's talking about infertility struggles. You had the nation's first, you know, well, I guess second, but Bill Clinton had been president before. So you had the first guy, normal guy, who could be running to be the first gentleman in Doug Emhoff. You have, you know, even Tim Walz playing, you know, a vice president, a man to a potential president who would be a woman. What did you think of, you know, the sort of masculinity that was presented by Democrats on stage this week?
Well, Alex, I think that Alexis hit the nail right on the head when she used the word contrast. It's very clear that the DNC was very much so intentional about drawing contrast and making more inclusive definitions of masculinity very apparent and putting that on center stage, both literally and figuratively. It's very clear if you look at the RNC, for example, they are a backward-looking organization in terms of how they are trying to cling to certain traditional constructs around masculinity, and the DNC in its political calculus has obviously figured out that they have an opportunity to attract a greater number of people if they expand certain definitions and the way that we think about these concepts. It is a tricky line because it's not going to resonate with everyone, but as far as getting their base energized and particularly involving and engaging new voters, it is something that is consistent with what we are seeing out in popular culture, and they're thinking that is going to have and pay off big dividends for them in November.
Yeah, I want to come back to you on who that's not going to resonate with. But before we do that, Alexis, Trump, I think it was today on Truth Social, claims to be a leader on in vitro fertilization and says this is really what he's saying. My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. We laugh at this because we all understand what he did to the Supreme Court, which in turn handed down the Dobbs decision. But there is some part of the American voting population that does not believe that Donald Trump will end a woman's right to choose. It will not end bodily
national
autonomy.
Abortion ban.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, like, how do you square that particular circle that he's drawing?
I mean, I don't even know what kind of shape he's talking about. Yeah, it doesn't actually resonate, make any sense to me because, you know, this is still the same man that bragged about overturning Roe v. Wade. Right. You know, the popular decision that, you know, went back to the states. Like, none of it makes sense. And I think that what Kamala Harris did last night in her speech, you know, really to me was the right frame. He is a deeply unserious man, right? He understands that his party is losing initiative after initiative, race after race, because they have failed us around reproductive freedom. And we are seeing registrations increase significantly among women in banned states, right, that are hitting net positive to the Democrats. And the reason is because we are making, we understand, right, what it means to not be able to make a decision if, when, and how you become pregnant, and what that means for our lives and our futures. And so I think, he's going to continue to do the things that he wants to do, but we have the receipts and we're clear about that.
Charles, when you talk about the sort of dynamics that some people may not be ready for, as we talk about gender roles and norms that are kind of being expanded in a way, as we saw at the DNC, I wonder how you kind of think about the dynamic on stage, right? We talked about Doug Emhoff and Kamala Harris, but there's also the Barack Obama, Michelle Obama dynamic where, they're two formidable orators in the Democratic Party. But in many ways, the former First Lady's speech was the more kind of combative, right? It was definitely the more emotionally fired up. His was kind of a meditation on what it means to be an American. And in that way, it was kind of a shift of the traditional, quote unquote, if we're talking about traditional warrior roles for men and women, how you think that played.
Well, I think that the notion of introducing new constructs of masculinity is fine to embrace, and I think it's not necessarily going to alienate a significant part of the base, so long as, and I think that the DNC did a good job here, you are not necessarily pushing people aside or making them feel wrong for how they show up. If it's inclusive, it needs to be inclusive for everyone. So I think to that point, one of the strongest and most powerful moments for Tim Walz was when his former players came on stage, because now you have essentially a group of jocks, a high school football team, super masculine, coming up. These guys were not in suits and ties. They were beer bellies, jerseys, coming on stage, and they were welcome. And I think that was a very important sight in terms of letting people know, look, you can fit in here too. I think that the demographic that I'm talking about, that's often turned off, they are vilified for showing up as they are. And that is something that Donald Trump has been able to appeal to. So there is a tightrope that the DNC walked here. I think that they did a good job about it. You don't necessarily have to call it out all the time. You show it with your actions, and the way they showed it, I think ultimately did not turn people off.
Yeah, I thought actually the football metaphors in the governor's speech, the football players, the drum line, I was on the floor, the flags everywhere. I think multiple nights there were signs that said USA, USA, USA. None of that is by chance. That was all very, very intentional. And that goes to what Charles is talking about, Alexis, is reclaiming all these freedoms under the banner of patriotism.
Yes, absolutely. And you could feel that. I mean, we were there. You could feel the energy. You could feel the pride, right? I also think it's a function of none of that felt poll tested to me. Yeah. It all felt authentic and true, right? From the top of the ticket all the way down. You could feel just a sense of sincerity, like this is who we are. And we're not going to hide who we are. This is what belonging, manifests in a convention center. And I think that's the joy that people are feeling. Like, we don't have to hide who we are. We don't have to, code switch because we think, the rest of America is not going to love us and value us, right? We are doing this every day in communities, and we understand that we are on the right side of this. And I think that, along with the just beautiful metaphor of just moving the ball forward, right? Not going back, moving the ball forward and actually claiming and being proud of the progress that we have made. That, to me, I think is the most patriotic piece.
And leaving a tent flap open for people who are curious about coming on in. Alexis McGill-Johnson and Charles Coleman, thank you guys so much for spending a little time on your Friday night with me. I appreciate you.